I still remember the first time I truly saw the world around me. Not just looked at it, but truly saw it. I was standing in my training hall, surrounded by students throwing punches with perfect form, executing kicks with flawless precision. They were doing everything right, technically. But something was missing, something essential. A young man approached me after class, frustrated despite his technical proficiency. "Master Lee," he said, "I've mastered every technique you've taught. I've memorized every form. But when I spar, something's wrong. I can't connect." I placed my hand on his shoulder and asked him a simple question. "When you look at your opponent, what do you see?" He looked confused. "I see someone I need to defeat." And there it was, the barrier that no physical training could overcome. The obstacle that no amount of practice could surmount. "That," I told him, "is your first mistake. What I'm about to share with you isn't found in training manuals. It's not something you can learn by watching others or memorizing movements. This wisdom won't come from punching harder or kicking faster. No, the secret I'm about to reveal is far more powerful, far more transformative than any physical technique could ever be. But I warn you, once you understand this truth, you can never go back. Your perception will be forever altered. The way you see the world, the way you move through it, will never be the same again. Are you ready to see what's been in front of you all along? The art of true observation begins only when the ego ends. Most people never truly see the world around them. They don't observe, they project. They filter everything through the lens of their ego, their preconceptions, their desires, their fears. They see not what is, but what they want to see, what they expect to see, what they've been conditioned to see. I learned this lesson not in moments of triumph, but in moments of defeat. Not when I was strong, but when I was broken. After establishing my school in Oakland, I found myself surrounded by challenges. Not just the physical challenges of teaching or the cultural barriers I faced, but the challenge of my own mounting success. The more recognition I received, the more my ego grew. The more praise I heard, the more I believed in my own mythology. Until one evening, alone in my training hall, I was working with an advanced student, a talented fighter who had been with me for years. We were sparring lightly, and I was, as usual, in complete control. Or so I thought. With my attention momentarily diverted by a thought, a fleeting moment of pride in my own abilities, my student landed a clean strike. Not particularly powerful, but undeniably clean. Something that should never have happened. In that moment, something strange occurred. I felt anger rising within me. Not at my student, but at myself. My ego was wounded. And in that wounded state, I pushed harder, moved faster, struck with more intensity than our friendly sparring session warranted. I saw fear flash in my student's eyes. And suddenly, I saw myself. Truly saw myself. Perhaps for the first time. I saw not a master teaching a student, but a man ruled by his ego, unable to accept even the smallest challenge to his perceived superiority. I saw not wisdom in action, but pride demanding satisfaction. I stopped immediately, bowed to my student, and walked alone to the small meditation room adjacent to the training floor. There, in silence, I confronted the most formidable opponent I had ever faced, my own ego. You face this same opponent every day, don't you? Not just in physical challenges, but in every aspect of your life. When your boss criticizes your work, when a friend disagrees with your opinion, when a stranger cuts you off in traffic, that flash of defensiveness, that surge of self-justification, that's your ego fighting to maintain its position. And in those moments, you are blind. Truly blind to reality. You see not what is, but only the threat to who you think you are. True observation, seeing what is actually before you, understanding what is actually happening. This is impossible when the ego stands in the way. The ego distorts everything it touches. It's like trying to see clearly through a warped glass. Everything becomes twisted, distorted, misshapen. In martial arts, this blindness is fatal if you cannot see your opponent clearly, not as you wish them to be, not as you fear them to be, not as you fear them to be, but as they truly are. You have already lost. If you cannot observe without the filter of your ego, you will be defeated before the first punch is thrown. The same principle applies in every area of life. How many arguments could be resolved if both parties could truly see the situation clearly, without the ego's need to be right? Without the ego's need to be right. How many relationships might be saved if we could observe our partners as they truly are, not as our ego wishes them to be? How many opportunities have you missed because your ego was too busy defending its territory to notice what was right in front of you? Let me tell you about the 3 veils of ego that prevent true observation. 3 barriers that stand between you and reality. When you approach any situation with rigid expectations about how things should be, about how people should behave, about how events should unfold, you've already clouded your vision. You're no longer observing what is, you're merely looking for confirmation of what you expect. I saw this constantly in my early days of teaching. Students would come to me having read about my philosophy, having watched my demonstrations, having formed an image in their minds of what training with Bruce Lee would be like. And when reality didn't match their expectations, when the training was harder than anticipated, when the concepts were more nuanced than they'd imagined, they couldn't see the value in what was actually before them. Their expectations had blinded them. The second veil is judgment. The moment you label something as good or bad, as right or wrong, as worthy or unworthy, in that very moment, you've ceased to truly observe it. You've replaced the complexity of what is with the simplicity of a judgment. I remember watching 2 of my students sparring. One was technically proficient, but rigid in his thinking. After each exchange, he would immediately categorize what had happened. That was a good counter. Footwork was sloppy. That defense was weak. Defense was weak. And in his constant judging, he missed the flow of the exchange, the patterns emerging, the opportunities presenting themselves. He could not respond effectively because he was too busy judging to truly observe. The third and most dangerous veil is identification. When you identify so strongly with your thoughts, your beliefs, your position that you become them, you can no longer see clearly. Your identity becomes threatened by anything that challenges these aspects of yourself, and true observation becomes impossible. During my time in Hollywood, I encountered this veil constantly. People weren't just holding ideas about martial arts or about acting. They were those ideas. Any suggestion that there might be another way, any demonstration that contradicted their understanding, was taken not as information to be observed, but as a personal attack to be defended against. against. These three veils, expectation, judgment, identification, they don't just cloud your vision in martial arts. They blind you in every aspect of life. They stand between you and reality like an impenetrable fog, distorting everything you think you see. But there is a way through the fog. There is a way through the fog. There is a path to clear seeing. It begins with a simple recognition. You are not your ego. You are not your thoughts about yourself. You are not your achievements. You are not your failures. You are not your failures. You are not what others think of you. You are not even what you think of yourself. The ego is merely a construct, a useful fiction perhaps, but a fiction nonetheless. And when you realize this, truly realize it, not just intellectually but viscerally, something extraordinary happens. The veils begin to lift. True observation becomes possible. Let me share with you a practice that transformed my own ability to observe. I call it the mirror of awareness. Each morning, before I begin my physical training, I stand before a mirror. Not to examine my physique or perfect my technique, but to establish a relationship with the observer within myself. I look into my own eyes and ask, who is looking? Who is aware right now? With consistent practice, you begin to recognize that there are two distinct aspects of yourself. The ego self that is constantly thinking, judging, wanting, fearing, and the aware self that observes all of this. The ego self is like the surface of the ocean, constantly in motion, affected by every wind that blows. The aware self is like the depths, still, clear, unchanging. When you learn to identify with this aware self rather than the ego self, true observation begins. You no longer see the world through the distortions of expectation, judgment, and identification. You see what is actually before you. In combat, this shift in perception is nothing short of revolutionary. When I face an opponent from the perspective of my ego, I'm trapped in a web of thoughts. Will I win? What if I lose? What technique should I use? What will others think? These thoughts create tension, hesitation, blindness. But when I face an opponent from the awareness beyond ego, something remarkable happens. I don't think about winning or losing. I don't worry about how I look or what others might say. I simply observe, clearly, directly, without distortion. I see not what I expect to see or what I fear to see, but what is actually there. And in that clear seeing, appropriate action arises naturally, effortlessly, like water flowing downhill. This state, observation without ego, is what I mean when I talk about being like water. Water doesn't try to be water. It doesn't think about being water. It simply is water, responding perfectly to every situation because it's not distorted by ego. When water encounters a rock, it doesn't get angry or frustrated. It doesn't try to force its way through. It simply flows around. When water finds itself in a cup, it doesn't complain about the constraints. It simply takes the shape of the cup. Water always responds perfectly to its environment because there is no ego creating resistance to what is. This is the essence of Jeet Kune Do, not a collection of techniques, but a state of clear observation that leads to appropriate action. When you can truly see, without the distortions of ego, effective action follows naturally. But make no mistake, reaching this state is not easy. The ego does not surrender its position without a fight. It has been your constant companion for so long that you've mistaken it for yourself. Separating from it feels like a kind of death. And in a way, it is. It's the death of an illusion, but an illusion you've lived with for so long that it feels like reality. Let me tell you about the day I experienced this ego death most profoundly. I was training alone late one night, pushing myself beyond exhaustion, as was my habit. My body was screaming for rest, but my ego, always demanding more, always insisting that I wasn't good enough yet, drove me relentlessly forward. During a particularly intense sequence, I felt something give way in my back. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. I collapsed to the floor, unable to move, barely able to breathe. In that moment of complete helplessness, something unexpected happened. As the physical pain peaked, my mind suddenly went still. The constant chatter of my ego, its demands, its fears, its incessant self-evaluation, all of it simply stopped. And in that stillness, I experienced a clarity of perception I had never known before. I saw my situation with perfect catastrophe, not as a failure, not as anything to judge or resist, but simply as what was. I saw my body not as something to push beyond limits, but as something to listen to. I saw my ambition not as a virtue, but as an attachment that was causing suffering. Most importantly, I saw that I was not my ego. I was the awareness observing the ego. And in that recognition, I found a freedom that no physical prowess could ever provide. This is what I'm inviting you to discover, not just a philosophical concept, but a lived experience of seeing beyond the ego. An experience that will transform not just how you fight, but how you live. But how do you reach this state of egoless observation in your daily life? How do you part the veils that keep you from seeing clearly? Let me share with you 4 practices that I've refined over years of exploration. These are not theoretical exercises, they are practical tools that, with consistent application, will dramatically enhance your ability to observe without the distortions of ego. First, the practice of physical attention. Begin each day by bringing your full attention to simple physical sensations. Feel the weight of your body against the chair or floor. Feel the air moving in and out of your lungs. Feel the sensations in your hands, your feet, your face. Don't judge these sensations as good or bad, pleasant or unpleasant. Simply observe them with complete attention. Why is this important? Because physical sensations are happening now, and the ego can only operate in the realm of thought, in memories of the past or projections about the future. By anchoring your attention in physical sensation, you step outside the ego's domain. You create space between yourself and your ego-driven thoughts. I practice this attention to physical sensation constantly throughout my day. When teaching, when training, when eating, when walking down the street, I continually bring my attention back to the immediate physical experience. This keeps me grounded in reality rather than lost in the ego's interpretations. Second, the practice of name and shame. When you notice yourself becoming emotionally reactive, angry, defensive, insecure, proud, stop and mentally name what's happening. Nick, is my ego feeling threatened? Then visualize the shape of this reaction in your body. Where exactly do you feel it? What size is it? What color would it be if you could see it? This practice creates a crucial separation between you, the observer, and the ego reaction you're experiencing. Instead of being your anger, you're observing your anger. Instead of being your insecurity, you're watching it arise and take shape. Most people look at the world through a heavily filtered lens, constantly evaluating, judging, categorizing. Practice looking at people, situations, and even your own thoughts with what I call the neutral gaze, seeing what's actually there rather than what you think about what's there. Or what's there. When you look at another person, can you see them clearly without immediately categorizing them as attractive or unattractive, friend or foe, useful or useless to you? When you walk into a room, can you observe what's actually there without ranking it on your personal scale of good and bad? This neutral gaze doesn't mean you never make distinctions or judgments. Those are necessary for functioning in the world. But it means you first see clearly, and then, fourth and most challenging, the practice of embracing contradiction. The ego craves consistency and certainty. It wants to be right. It wants everything to fit neatly into its existing framework of understanding. When faced with contradiction or paradox, the ego becomes deeply uncomfortable. But reality is full of contradiction and paradox. To see clearly, you must become comfortable with this fact. Practice holding opposing ideas in your mind simultaneously without immediately trying to resolve them. Notice how the ego rushes to eliminate contradiction, to declare one side right and the other wrong, and then consciously step back from this impulse. Can something be both beautiful and flawed? Can someone be both right and wrong? Can you be both strong and vulnerable? The ego says no, things must be one or the other. Clear observation says yes. Reality is rarely so neat and categorical. I practice this embrace of contradiction in my martial art. Jeet Kune Do contains principles that seem contradictory, firm yet yielding. Move decisively yet remain adaptable. Have a plan yet remain spontaneous. The ego finds this maddening. The clear observer recognizes that these apparent contradictions are simply different facets of a complex reality. These four practices, physical attention, name, and shape. But remember, the ego will not surrender easily. It will fight to maintain its position. It will use every trick at its disposal to keep you identified with it. It will make you believe that without it, you are nothing, that without it, you cannot function in the world. This is the ego's greatest deception. In truth, you function most effectively when you are free from the ego's distortions. You respond most appropriately to life's challenges when you can see them clearly, without the fog of ego clouding your vision. Now, let me bring this back to where we started. The young man in my training hall who couldn't connect despite his technical proficiency. What was missing? What was missing? Why, despite knowing all the right moves, could he not translate that knowledge into effective action? The answer is now clear. He could not truly see his opponent. He was so caught up in thoughts about himself, about winning and losing, about looking good, about proving his worth, that he was blind to what was actually before him. His ego had created a veil between him and reality. I took him aside for a special training session, but instead of teaching him new techniques, I taught him how to observe, how to see beyond the veil of ego. I taught him to feel his feet on the ground, to notice the rise and fall of his breath, to identify the ego reactions arising within him, and to name them rather than become them. And then I had him spar again, but with a crucial difference. Don't try to win, I told him. Don't even try to fight well. Simply observe your opponent, not as someone to defeat, but as a reality to understand. See not what you expect to see, Not what you fear to see, not what you hope to see, but what is actually there. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. His movements, previously stiff and predictable, became fluid and responsive. His attacks, previously telegraphed and easily countered, became deceptive and effective. His defense, previously rigid and reactionary, became supple and anticipatory. What changed? Not his technical knowledge. That remained the same. What changed was his perception. He was now seeing clearly, without the distortions of ego. And in that clear seeing, appropriate action arose naturally. This is the promise I make to you. Learn to observe without ego, and everything changes. Not just in martial arts, but in every aspect of your life. When you can truly see your work challenges, not filtered through fears of failure or desires for recognition, but as they actually are, effective solutions emerge naturally. When you can truly see your relationships not distorted by expectations of how others should behave or judgments about their worth, but as they actually are, genuine connection becomes possible. When you can truly see yourself, not through the ego's funhouse mirror of self-image and self-judgment, but as you actually are, authentic growth can occur. True observation begins when ego ends. This is not just a philosophical concept. It is a practical reality that can transform your life. Let me leave you with a final challenge. For the next 7 days, commit to the practice of egoless observation. Each morning, remind yourself, today I will practice seeing clearly, without the distortions of ego. Throughout the day, notice when your ego arises, when you become defensive, when you feel the need to be right, when you judge others harshly, when you worry about how you're being perceived. In those moments, don't fight against the ego, that only strengthens it. Instead, simply observe it. Name it. Ah, there's my ego feeling threatened. There's my ego needing to be right. There's my ego judging others to feel superior. This simple act of awareness creates space between you and your ego. In that space, freedom is found. Day by day, you'll begin to see more clearly. You'll respond more appropriately to life's challenges. You'll connect more authentically with others. Not because you've learned new skills or strategies, but because you've removed the veil that prevented you from seeing clearly in the first place. Remember, water doesn't try to defeat the rock. It doesn't struggle against obstacles. It simply flows around them. Why? Because water sees clearly what is before it and responds appropriately without the distortions of ego. Be water, my friend. See clearly. Respond naturally. Live fully. True observation begins when ego ends. This is the beginning of wisdom. This is the art of living. The mirror awaits you now, not to show you your reflection, but to reveal the observer behind the reflection. The one who has always been there, watching, aware, yet free from the limitations of ego. The one who sees not what should be, not what could be, but what is. And in that clear seeing, you will find a power and a peace that no amount of fighting could ever provide.